Hey everybody, it's Anthony and Bob Barker back again for another build. This time we're going to be making a indoor doghouse or Bob house for Bob Barker. And the whole point of this one is just to kind of give him a nice little private cozy place to rest when he sees fit. Prior to this, like, my wife had a crate in her office. He does not like being in the crate if the door is closed, but with the door open, he likes it as a little resting spot. So we figured we would put this together just to kind of give him a little bit of a nicer area to take a rest whenever he decides. And as you can see, we're starting off with just some regular plywood and making just a basic box like I have on multiple of my other videos. So if you're curious to the reasoning behind how I'm putting this together, I explain it a little bit more detail in those ones. But since I've done that a few times, we're just kind of going more with the highlights here. So when we're making this, we had a few things in mind for the design. The first was it's going to be in her office, so she wanted it to match kind of like a set with the other furniture that we've made in there, including her desk, as well as in that large built-in unit that was initially meant to be her DJ table. And then as far as the sizing of it, I kind of built it a little bit based on the size of the crate that he had previously. And then the biggest constriction I did on the parameters is he has a little pad that went on the bottom of that. So we wanted it to kind of match up well for that. So he would have like a good amount of space just to kind of get in there comfortably and relax and not feel a little too cramped. So there we have all of the walls in the bottom done, and we're gluing and screwing the top piece in. For most of this, I'm trying to make sure that none of the screws are visible. This is going to be the only spot where if you look hard enough, you might be able to notice them, but I'm going to fill in those holes with an epoxy putty, so realistically, you're never going to see them. And then you do see there, the top is a little bit bigger. That'll make more sense when I start doing the rest of the trim on it. But for here, we're cutting out a small little window that I wanted to put on the side just for a little extra light and circulation in there. And so I'm just using my track saw to do it. But of course, because of the shape of the blade itself, it won't cut all the way to the corner. So I'm just using the jigsaw to finish up those cuts. And in the end, it still gave me a nice clean cut. There's like one or two spots where there's a little bit of a lip there, and I just used the chisel to finish cleaning that up later. And then after we got that out, we're going to be putting in the back piece. And what I decided to do for this is just to put a rabbet all around the edge and then inset it. You're never going to see this back end, so there'll be a small little seam there that you could notice, but I just didn't want the sides of the plywood to be visible if you're looking at this from the side, that would be much more noticeable. So after we did with the router, I just kind of finished up with a chisel. Now we're going to glue this into place, and it fit really nice and snug, which I was pretty darn happy with that. And even with that, once you get it painted, you really have a hard time even noticing that seam. Even if the cut wasn't that perfect, you would still be able to fill it in with a little wood filler or even like that epoxy putty. So now that the main structure of it is done, I want to do the trim and the little privacy screen that we're going to make. So for this, I did choose white oak, and that kind of goes along with the furniture that I mentioned we already have for my wife. So it's going to be painted white, most of it, along with this trim. So basically, we're cutting our strips down to size, and I'm making a face frame here first. And that's what's going to go and sit underneath the lip of that little top part that was going off, because I have an extra plan for the rest of it. So just for simplicity here, we just cut them down to size, and I'm going to be pocket holing them together. When this one, because these are relatively small, you just have to be careful not to split the wood when you're driving in these screws, especially on this top piece there, because it's even thinner. And the whole idea behind this is basically that top piece is going to be a little bit hidden, but I'm going to have a secondary trim in front of it, and so that's why it kind of looks a little odd here. So I'm gluing this in place, and for this front trim, I decided I'm not going to be putting any pin nails or anything else. I'm just going to glue it and clamp it, and that will hold it in place. And when I do make like the face frames like this, I make them just slightly oversized. That way you can just use the flush trim bit to get them completely flush with the sides. It's much easier to do that than try to get it like, the perfect size at the very beginning. And so after we get that part taken care of, I do switch out my bit, and then we're going to do just small roundovers on the rest of it just to kind of break down those sharp edges. We're just going to make them a little nicer to the touch and also a little bit more resistant to getting dented if you accidentally hit them. And this piece here is why I made that top part of the edge banding a little bit thinner, because I wanted it to match up with this front trim. And the front trim is going to go, of course, on top of the plywood to sit flush with there. So it matches that into the sides. And then this isn't going to be just on the front. We're going to do this all around it just to kind of finish it up. And I decided instead of doing like mitered edges, I'm just going to do butt joints here because, the look was good enough, and it just doing the extra joints just kind of seemed a little unnecessary to me for this particular one. So most of this I just glued and clamped it in place, and then I would just let it dry and then kind of move on. Then I realized I got a new toy, which is a little pin nailer, so then I used that to hold it in place, and that did pretty well. I initially intended just to do the front and the two sides, but once I got that on there, I just realized the back didn't quite look right to me without it, so I decided to add it there too. So the first thing I did is just kind of flushed that up on the parts that were protruding, just to make sure that these ones would sit nicely. And in the front and back pieces, I did do those a little bit long. That way I can just come and flush those up with a track saw too, and so then everything goes together nice and perfectly. And of course, as I'm doing it, I'm intermittently just kind of sanding everything. That way it doesn't all build up all on me at once. So that gets most of the main structure. But next we're going to be making the privacy screen. And so my idea for this one is I didn't want it to be completely solid, but I wanted just enough pieces to make it feel a little bit more. So we're going to be putting together that with some white oak and some walnut. So I kind of got those cut out, but before we did that, I decided just to go ahead and paint the main structure. And of course, we taped off the trim pieces that we already put in. That way it'll stay with that nice white oak. So we did the primer, and then we came back on with this white cabinet paint that we've used multiple times in the past. And then once we pulled off that tape, those lines were nice and crisp. I was really happy with how good those came out. And then so here you can see the pattern that we're kind of going for. I used a few spacers just to kind of get this all lined up. And then it's kind of like a little zigzag pattern there with the white oak and the walnut. I went through a few iterations, and this is the one that my wife liked the best, and therefore that's the one we went with. Now, what I'm doing to put this together is basically I'm just smearing some wood glue and then a dab of CA glue in the middle of each one of these little pieces. And then, of course, you're just using the activator, and that's going to hold it as like with clamping pressure with the CA glue while the regular wood glue dries. It was a bit tedious because there was a lot of these little pieces, but it ended up working out really well in the long run. I'm sure there's probably a lot better ways to do it, but that's just what popped in my head, and so that's what I went with. And all of this came together really nicely. Doing it like one bit at a time. If there's anything that's just kind of out of square, you got any of those blocks that aren't perfectly in width with the other ones, you could always just kind of run it through your table saw and just kind of rip down an edge and make sure everything gets squared up again as you continue. Then as we were finishing this part up, I realized there's a couple more little pieces that I wanted to add. One, the opening for the window just seemed a little bare by itself. So we're gonna just add a little bit extra of the white oak trim from the scraps that I had. So basically I just squared it up, and then we cut it down to like a pretty thin size, because I didn't want that to be as thick as the other trim, because then it'll look a little bit funny. Then we cut them down to their final length, and I used, of course, the stop block just to make sure everything fit really nicely, and then we can just glue these all together. I figured there's no point in doing any type of fancy joinery or anything, because it's just like some small superficial trim. And then after I put these ones together, I actually made two more that looked pretty much the same, but I actually just cut those pieces even thinner, because I wanted to make them as small little picture frames that we're going to hang on the inside, just to make it feel a little bit more cozy and at home for Bob Barker. And so after I did this, I did kind of sand it down and just round over those edges just so it would go well with all the rest of it. And since I already put the paint on this, I couldn't use any wood glue, so I just put a little CA glue. And then I grabbed my new pin nailer and just threw a few of those in there, and it held it really nicely, and you can't really notice those pins very well. So for the bottom, I just thought it would sit better, even though this is going to go on carpet. I just figured, since I don't even think the carpeted floors in my house are level, just putting those little feet on will make it sit really nice. So after that, we go over to put all the roundovers on this front little privacy screen. Then we give it one last sanding, and then it's on to the finish. And we are using Rubio Monocoat again on this one. We're doing a 50% bourbon and 50% smoke 5% mix, just like we did to other furniture in my wife's office. Now, when it comes to the two pictures, we printed out a couple pictures for Bob Barker to put in there. And one of them is actually a picture of my mom's puppy, which he really does not like. And so he added some extra art to the picture there. And of course, the other one is just him and my wife sitting poolside. And to fix those on the inside, we ended up just using some double-sided tape, and it fits really nicely. And then for this privacy screen, you can see how it turned out. I was a little bit worried about the finish on there, but it came out really nice. And I'm just gonna put some screws from the inside, and I did pre-drill that and countersink them so it all sits nice and flush, and there's not gonna be anything sticking out that he can catch himself on. And then that's pretty much the end of the project. I think it came out really nice, and he has, on his own, jumped in there to take a few naps, so he approves. And more importantly, the wife likes it as well. So if you're interested in making this project yourself, check the links below. We'll have some detailed plans available. Otherwise, we'll see you guys in the next one.